Beautiful. And once we have the connection in place, once we can work with our database, usually my next step is to set up the controllers as well as the routes. So essentially a structure. Now, of course, normally you cannot set up all the routes right from the start because you add more as you're developing, but this is the case where I already know all the routes. So that way we can right away test everything in a Postman so the basic setup works, and then we don't have to jump around. Essentially, from that point, we'll just work in the controllers and the models. Now, of course, there's going to be some other stuff as well, but the point being is that we won't have to jump with every controller pretty much. Set up the controller, then import it in the routes, and hopefully you get the gist. And the setup is going to be following where I want to create a controllers folder, and I'm going to start with auth controller. And it's my preference to usually use this type of naming convention simply because, especially once we start working back in the client, there's going to be a bunch of tabs open over here. And then it's easier if you can clearly see whether that is the auth router or auth controller. Again, it's my preference. So if you don't like that, you don't have to do it. Then I want to create following functions. And I'm right away showing the export, basically what we'll be exporting. And you want to create a function. And then inside of the function, simple return with the res.sten and then function name. And this is, again, just so we can quickly test everything in a Postman, because I'll set up all the routes and I want to test whether the structure is in place. If it is, then again, we don't have to repeat that step. And then we want to create a route. And then in there, I want to go with auth routes. I want to set up the express router. And if you already forgot how to do that, I'll show you. And then we want import functions from auth controller. Basically these ones over here. And then as far as our routes, eventually in the server, we'll use the middleware. So we're going to go app.use, and then we're looking for API version 1. Essentially, this just signals that these are going to be API routes, and then all the auth routes are going to go over here to /auth. And then we'll use our auth router. Now in the auth router, the routes are going to be following. We'll have register, which is going to be post, then login, and post request, and update user will be a patch. My apologies. Actually, you'll see in your README that it is a patch. And then we'll set it up in the server. So we'll import auth router and set it up in the server. And we'll repeat the same steps with jobs as well. And then we'll test it out in the Postman. So let's start over here again. This is in the root. Please keep that in mind. And we're looking for controllers. That's the file name, or I'm sorry, folder name. And then we're looking for auth controller. So that's where the login, register, as well as update user functionality is going to be. And then, like I said, we want to create 3 functions. We want to create register, which is going to be looking for rec and res. And then in here, we're going to go with res.send, and then let's just send back register user, or whatever you want to do. And I'm going to copy and paste 1, 2. So there's going to be 3 of them total. And then this will be login. And then this one will be login as well. Login. So let's actually select maybe here both of them. And then let's write update and user, like so. So that's going to be my function. Now I can remove this one. And then I do want to export that. So I'll say export and then all 3 of them. So register, login, as well as update user. So once we have this, I'll actually grab this object and you'll see why in a second. Then we want to go back to the root again. And we're looking for routes. And then inside of the routes, I'm going to go with auth routes.js. And then we'll set up the router in a second. But before we do anything, I'm just going to go with import. Then I want to copy and paste my object. And I'm just going to look for my controllers. So that's going to be 1 level up. And then in the controllers, I'm specifically looking for auth controller. And then let's add that JS here. And with this in place, now we can set up our router. And then in order to do that, we need to go with import. We're still looking for express. So from and then express. And then we need to go with express dot and router. So const router is equal to express and dot and router over here. Now invoke it. And now let's set up our routes. So let me go back to my README just so I can double check. So I'm looking for router.route. First one register, then login, update user, post, and the last one is going to be a patch one. If you want, you can copy and paste, but in my case, I'm going to go with router.route. Then first one will be register. This is going to be a post request, and then we want to pass in the register. Copy and paste, and then looks like I missed here the R. And by the way, this is an awesome extension that really helps me out. Notice this blue squiggly line. So the extension that I'm using is this one. Code spell checker. That's the one. Now, even with this extension, I managed to make some dumb typos, meaning some spelling errors and all that. So it doesn't save me all the time, but this was the case where it nicely yelled at me and I was able to fix it. Just a quick side note. And then in here, we want to go with a login one. So let's select both of them again. And we're going to be looking for login. And then we want to go with our update user, correct? So let's take these ones. And then let's say update user. Let's save it. Let's export our router. So export default and then router. And then back in the server, I guess right after the connect DB, we can do that. Or right after middleware, that's really up to you. And I think I went in between. And you know what? I actually came up with a comment that I can add. I'm going to go here with DB and authenticate user, which we're going to set up later. But like I said, I'm going to set it up in between where I'm going to go with routers. And in here, I'm going to go with import, then auth router. And that is coming from in the routes, more specifically, auth routes.js. Let's save it. And then right after the home route, so this will still be our dummy route, but right after the home route, I want to go with app use. And like I said, the path will be API version 1, then auth, and then I want to pass in my middleware, which will be my router. So auth router over here. And once I set this one up, before we go any further, let's also remember that since these will be a post route, we want to access the JSON that is passed in, correct, with a request. And how do we do that? Well, we have a special built-in middleware coming from Express. So back in the server, before we go any further, I also want to go above all my routes, and I'm going to use app.use, express, and a JSON over here. I'll invoke it. And again, that will just make the JSON data available to us in the controllers. Since we'll have post requests, we'll be looking for stuff, and that stuff, that JSON data, will be passed to us using the express.json middleware. And once we have this in place, we have successfully set up the structure for the auth controller and routes.